If you have green eyes, you may have come across a claim that sounds almost too specific to be made up. That your eye color itself controls how efficiently your body makes vitamin D, that green eyes are some kind of biological signal requiring special nutritional attention most people never hear about, tucked away in some corner of the internet as though it were a secret doctors have overlooked. It's a compelling claim, precisely because it sounds so specific and scientific on the surface. It's also not how human biology actually works. The real connection between light eyes and vitamin D is stranger, more indirect, and once you understand it, more interesting than the myth it replaces. This is the real science behind why light-eyed populations really do carry a documented link to vitamin D adaptation, and why that link runs through your skin, not your eyes. Here's the claim as it usually circulates. Eye pigmentation, controlled by genes like OCA2, somehow directly regulates how well your body converts sunlight into usable vitamin D, meaning green-eyed people process sunlight differently than brown-eyed people and need to adjust their diet accordingly. It sounds specific enough to be scientific. It also skips over some very basic human anatomy. Here's the first real crack in that claim. Vitamin D synthesis happens in your skin, not your eyes. When ultraviolet B radiation from sunlight hits skin cells, it converts a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol into pre-vitamin D3, which your liver and kidneys then process further into the active, usable form of vitamin D your body actually uses for bone health, immune function, and calcium absorption. This entire chemical reaction takes place in skin tissue, specifically in the epidermis, the outermost layer of skin. The iris, the pigmented part of your eye that determines eye color, plays no role in this process whatsoever. It has no exposure to the kind of sustained skin-level UVB absorption that vitamin D synthesis actually requires, sitting protected behind the cornea and several other layers of eye tissue specifically designed to filter out the kind of UV exposure your skin is built to absorb. Genetically speaking, claiming eye color directly controls. Vitamin D production is a bit like claiming your hair color controls your digestion, connected to you, but not connected to each other in the way the claim implies. So where did this idea come from, and is there any real science underneath it? Here's the deeper layer that makes this genuinely interesting instead of simply wrong. The genes responsible for light eye color, OCA2 and HERC2 primarily, sit inside a broader genetic system that also helps regulate skin pigmentation, since both traits depend on the same underlying pigment, melanin, and many of the same genes that dial melanin production up or down in the iris also influence how much melanin your skin produces, along with hair color. In a shared network, geneticists sometimes describe as pleiotropic, meaning one gene influences multiple, seemingly separate physical traits at once. OCA2 in particular regulates a protein involved in the maturation of melanosomes, the small internal structures inside cells where melanin is actually manufactured and stored. And those same melanosomes exist in skin cells, hair follicle cells, and the pigment cells of the iris alike, all drawing on the same basic cellular machinery, just switched on or off to different degrees depending on the tissue. This is why light eyes and light skin so often show up together in the same populations, not because one causes the other, but because they're frequently switched by overlapping genetic machinery, inherited as a linked package rather than as two independent traits that just happen to travel together by coincidence. And skin pigmentation, unlike eye pigmentation, does have a well-documented direct relationship with vitamin D synthesis. Research led by biological anthropologists Nina Jablonski and George Chaplin has shown that as early human populations migrated out of equatorial Africa into higher latitudes, where sunlight is weaker and less direct for much of the year, natural selection favored lighter skin specifically because it allows more ultraviolet radiation to penetrate and trigger vitamin D synthesis, compensating for the reduced sunlight available at higher, colder latitudes. Darker skin, protective against intense equatorial UV radiation and the folate-destroying effects that radiation can cause, becomes a disadvantage for vitamin D production in places where there simply isn't enough strong sunlight to spare. Lighter skin was the evolutionary trade-off that let populations settling in Northern Europe and other high-latitude regions still make enough vitamin D to survive, support bone development, and maintain a functioning immune system through long, sun-starved winters. Historical medicine actually gives this evolutionary theory some real supporting evidence. Rickets, a bone-softening disease caused by severe vitamin D deficiency in childhood, became a serious public health problem in industrial European cities during the 19th century, when smoke-filled skies and long working hours indoors combined to block the sunlight even light-skinned populations depended on. The disease appeared regardless of eye color, striking blue-eyed, green-eyed, and brown-eyed children alike within the same smoke-darkened cities, a real historical pattern that lines up with skin exposure and geography, not with iris pigmentation, exactly as the underlying biology would predict. The same shared pigmentation network has found a modern, practical application well outside the vitamin D question entirely. Forensic researchers have built genetic prediction tools that estimate a person's likely eye color, hair color, and skin tone together as a linked set, directly from a DNA sample, useful in cases where no witness description exists. These tools work specifically because the genes are so tightly linked. Knowing someone's OCA2 and HERC2 variants helps predict eye color reasonably well on its own, but combining that data with the broader panel of skin pigmentation-associated genes dramatically improves overall accuracy, further confirming, from a completely different angle, just how tightly eye color and skin tone travel together genetically, without either one causing the other. Picture small groups of early humans migrating steadily northward out of Africa, tens of thousands of years ago, moving into landscapes with shorter winters, weaker sun, and far less UV exposure than the equatorial regions their ancestors had adapted to for hundreds of thousands of years, generation after generation, pushing deeper into territory their bodies were never originally built for. Over many generations, the same genetic dial that lightened their skin, improving vitamin D synthesis in this new, sun-starved environment, was frequently linked to genes that also lightened eye color as a side effect, riding along on the same broader pigmentation pathway rather than being separately selected for its own reason. Nobody's survival ever depended on eye color itself. Light eyes became common in these populations, not because evolution cared about eye color specifically, but because it happened to sit next to the trait that actually mattered for survival, carried along for the ride purely by genetic proximity. Here's the twist that keeps this honest rather than overselling the connection. When researchers have specifically tested for a direct, independent link between eye color and measured vitamin D levels in the blood, once skin tone is properly accounted for statistically, the effect of eye color alone essentially disappears. Skin pigmentation predicts vitamin D synthesis efficiency. Eye color, on its own, does not add meaningful additional information once you already know someone's skin tone because it was never actually part of the mechanism to begin with, just a passenger riding alongside it. This is a common pattern in population health research more broadly, where a trait that correlates strongly with an outcome in a simple comparison turns out to have no real effect at all once researchers control for the actual underlying variable driving both. Eye color is a visible marker riding alongside the trait that actually matters, not a hidden second switch controlling anything on its own, and any claim suggesting otherwise is mistaking a genetic coincidence of shared ancestry for a working biological mechanism. What is well established, and worth knowing accurately, rather than through a misleading eye color framing, is that skin tone genuinely does affect vitamin D synthesis efficiency. Public health researchers have long documented that people with darker skin pigmentation generally need more sun exposure time, or in some cases dietary supplementation, to produce the same amount of vitamin D as someone with lighter skin gets from a shorter exposure, particularly in regions with limited sunlight for much of the year. Geography compounds this further. Populations living at higher latitudes, further from the equator, receive weaker, more indirect sunlight for a larger portion of the year, regardless of skin tone, which is part of why vitamin D deficiency remains a genuinely common, well-studied public health concern across much of Northern Europe, Canada, and similar regions, independent of anyone's eye color. This is genuine, actionable public health information, but it's about skin tone and geography specifically, assessed with a doctor or a simple blood test if you're concerned about your own levels, not something you can infer from eye color alone. So if you have green eyes, here's the accurate version of this story. Your eye color isn't secretly running your vitamin D metabolism behind the scenes. It's a visible echo of the same ancient genetic reshuffling that, in your more distant ancestors, likely also lightened their skin as populations pushed into low sunlight regions of the world thousands of years ago. A package deal written into a handful of shared genes rather than two separately engineered traits. The real story here isn't a secret hidden switch in your eyes. It's a reminder that a lot of what looks like one trait causing another is actually two traits that simply came from the same place, inherited together, evolved together, and easy to mistake for a direct connection that was never really there. If you're genuinely concerned about your own vitamin D levels, the accurate, useful information isn't found by checking a mirror. It's found through an actual blood test and a conversation with a doctor who can factor in your real skin tone, geography, diet, and sun exposure, all of the genuine variables that matter rather than a single visible trait that, however striking it looks, was never built to carry that particular signal on its own. There's a broader lesson worth taking from a myth like this one, beyond the specific facts about eyes and vitamin D. Human genetics is full of traits that travel together for reasons that have nothing to do with one causing the other, simply because they were shaped by the same ancient evolutionary pressures, riding on the same shared genetic pathways. It's an easy pattern to mistake for something more mysterious than it actually is, especially when a claim is dressed up with real gene names and real scientific language. The genuinely fascinating part of this story was never a secret switch hiding in green eyes. It's the fact that a visible trait completely unrelated to vitamin D metabolism can still, indirectly, tell you something true about where your ancestors' bodies were adapting to survive, tens of thousands of years before anyone understood why.